All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending. I know that a lot of people are coming in from the introduction, so I want to just be time conscious because I definitely want to get through this important message. And it was great to see our new Secretary of Education, Dr. Cardona, speak so fondly about what he wants to do in education, and also giving a shout out to Connecticut as well. As you can see, Connecticut is very progressive in its practice and its ideologies, and how we're using this time, even when Dr. Cardona was commissioner here, using this time, this moment, to be able to reimagine and think about education differently. And in Middletown, Connecticut, Middletown Public Schools, we have been looking at education differently, not from your traditional standardization of how education or structures of education, the model itself has been implemented for the past 250, 300 years, but really looking at the elements of education right now, or looking at the systems and modifying it and changing the architecture to incorporate two words that I think is fundamental in this practice: innovation and equity. And this is such a great time and opportunity. I'm Michael Connor. I am the superintendent of Middletown Public Schools located in Middletown, Connecticut. I'm very proud of our district, what we have accomplished under the auspice of our strategic operating plan. And now within the initial stages, excuse me, of developing our new strategic operating plan, Middletown 2024, I'm encouraging our stakeholders within this great ecosystem to be bold. And I'm encouraging you to be bold in your practices, in your thinking, because now we have to be able to leverage this opportunity to really create equity and moving beyond just the equity needle, but this level of anti-marginalization in the context of what that looks like in our classrooms and how we can create it using a scientific approach. So we know that if you think about it, the COVID pandemic, the novelty of this virus has created three different stages in education. What we know before March 13th, 2020. I think that's a day that everybody in education will never forget. I would call that the before COVID stage, right? Education prior to the pandemic. And then the stage that we're actually living in is the during COVID stage. But now we can't have this continued perseveration over or in education in the during COVID stage. But now we have to start being more future focused and aligning our lens to what this looks like in the after COVID stage or the after disease, how we can reimagine or reconceptualize our work within this great industry. And more importantly, what we can do for our, what I say in Middletown, our most important customers, our most important practitioners, most important customers, specifically around our families and students, and our most important practitioners who are leaders and teachers. So before COVID, if you remember, right, there's no secret about traditional education. Um, I, I'm a progressive leader, a progressive educator, right? I know that a few people call me in Connecticut the Bernie Sanders of education, right? Because I decry traditional education and what the traditional structures or the incumbent model looks like. Historically, this is what our classrooms have looked like. I intentionally put that picture up there because we made some, I would say, incremental logic changes within that structure. Maybe now we add a roundtable for small group instruction. Maybe we add elements of differentiated practices, heterogeneous grouping in lieu of homogeneous grouping. But a lot of the traditional norms of education, the traditional apparatuses of grading, of grade levels, still exist. Before COVID, this is what our classrooms look like, even to a point when we look at pedagogy, monolithic and didactyl in context where students just regurgitate informations, rote-based memorization. Where are we truly preparing students for this radical world, this economic demand of technology that is around us? So there's really no secret. And if we think about from the research and the data from the Stanford Center for Education Policy, we see that traditional education, the traditional or the legacy model of education has created these persistent gaps that we talk about, whether it be at the early childhood sector with the preparation gap, and that leads this throughput into the achievement gap. The white, black, white, Hispanic gap has narrowed nationally, but it's not at a rate or an acceleration where the gap is closing, significantly closing. You see the standard deviations or psychometricians or statisticians. When you see that in technical term or layman's term, it's not moving at the propensity that we want to. We know that there are specific elements that contribute to this achievement gap, whether it be the socioeconomic disparities that we see between white, black, Hispanic families, as well as poverty and unemployment rates. These are all specific axioms that contribute to this achievement gap, this conglomerate of how we have to be able to part and parcel to be able to address this. Directly from the Center of Education Statistics, the nation's report card, we saw a decline from 2017 to 2019 in grade 4 and grade 8. 1 point and 3 point, 1 point and 3 point respectively. And over the sustained period, if you look at a variety of data in the context of 5 years, we see that high performance students are making gains while low performance students are not making significant gains. Again, it correlates back to the data from the Stanford Center for Education Policy that we're not making significant enough margins to be able to close this achievement gap. So when we look at this, right, compounded where on March 13th, our life has significantly changed, we moved into this during COVID stage. And within the during COVID stage, this transition from traditional education or this industrial model that we're used to, where now teachers within 2 weeks, 14 days, had to move to complete remote learning, distance learning. This is where now we had to take a look at closing the digital divide, ensuring that our most impact families had food during this time, had the broadband to be able to access their teachers and their classrooms. And then in 2021, to be able to mitigate the spread of the virus, we had to move into a variety of different operating models within education, i.e., whether it be a full distance learning experience for some students or some type of hybrid experience to ensure social distancing and physical distancing protocols and parameters are in place. What was the forecasted impact? Specifically, when we started from March 13th on to the academic year. I shared this with my team, the Minish study, and when I look at these two different data visualizations and look at the predictive analytics that was developed within this model by Minish from NWEA, it was the collaborative study, we see that the actual date from closure, typical growth versus what the impact of the COVID slide, statistically and numerically, we know that in mathematics, the data visualization on your left, students from the 1920 academic year, as they were about to start the 2021 academic year, was only going to retain 50% of what they learned. The learning loss or the learning gains in the context of loss was at 50%. Reading was more on the lines of a forecasted outcome of 70%. So when you take those numbers and you couple it with other specific data variables and attributions within the model, you see this very wide variance in the context of the achievement gap exacerbating itself by 13%, from 23% from K5 and all the way up to a K6, I apologize, in 7-12, which is 36%. That is a wide variance, meaning the volatility and the predictability, there's going to be impact, but there's going to be negative impact. What does that specifically state? We're in a crisis, right? And when I think about this crisis that we're in, this education crisis, we had traditional foundational structures of an industrial model that we know was creating an achievement gap, an exacerbated gap. Then we move into the during COVID stage, where now COVID has intensified the propensity of this crisis. By now, the forecasted model, because of the inconsistency and the capacity of where we're at, of understanding how to be able to navigate through this pandemic, is creating a crisis. Then, on top of that, February 25th, 2020, we saw Ahmaud Arbery get shot while jogging in Georgia. Then the day of the pandemic, March 13th, 2020, we see Breonna Taylor get shot sitting in her own house. And then right in the midst, the height of the pandemic, May 25th, 2020, we see George Floyd get killed. Everybody knows, or what resonates with them is the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. We see now this racial and social injustice, looking at it from the education lens, the context of our industry and entity. Specifically now, you have this gap. You see the disparities in achievement. You see pedagogy, as well as architectures and systems, are working against Black and Brown students. And then the racial and social injustice that our students did see during this pandemic, you have an even bigger crisis to deal with. How are we going to deal with all of this in education? How are we going to be able to address some of the systemic issues, the systemic quandaries that we have to be able to deal with? Now, as we're in this during COVID stage, right, we see the predictive models are suggestion that the achievement gap is going to be exacerbated between 23 to 36%. The forecasted models are talking about students are only going to retain up to 50% of what they learned in math and 70% in ELA. Within these traditional structures of education, systems that have historically left students behind, now this is the opportunity, right? The opportunity and the challenge to be able to advance progressive ideologies, methodologies, and strategies in our districts and our schools to be able to move the needle finally to make these change. But there is a level of flexibility that one has to underpin. There is a level of risk and measuring the novelty of that risk and the after COVID stage. And as we start to think about the after COVID stage, we have to think about how we're going to re-engineer education differently, reimagining what our system can look like, reimagine what our industry, this entity, can look like. And there's two words that come to mind: innovation, right? As we start to think about changing fundamental structures and fundamental practices in education, this is the time where we can experiment, try, think about this new process of inputs, testing those inputs, learning from those inputs to be able to scale outputs strategically. And then also now equity. And we have to look at equity in a segmented manner, specifically around different subgroups of students, and asking those hard questions and being bold and ensuring that people feel uncomfortable talking about topics that have historically been taboo in education. That right there, leaders, teachers, is an art and a science. The scientific aspect of design, the scientific aspect of creating a systematic approach of innovation, but also using the artistic piece to be able to captivate or change mental models around this innovation strategy, whether it be from the systems lens, from an organizational standpoint, or even down to the classroom, how we're moving students in a personalized context. Now, it works in a parallel way. To be agile, to have this level of strategic agility, I like to say, is you have to be able to create a plan. You have to have a plan, and you have to be able to ensure that you can be able to test the functions of those plans. Is a parallelization between process and content, right? The process is how you develop that plan based on data, based on the needs, and then implementing that plan and monitoring the work and being able to make adjustments to that work. You have to think about how now your strategies are going to be aligned to what I call this systemic equity framework. A partner of mine that I work with developing strategic plans We've been working together, whether it be developing a strategic plan that was when I was in a previous capacity, as well as now the strategic planning process here in Middletown. We took a framework or looked at some of these elements of the variety of different gaps that we see in education and created into a framework to ensure that our work, the milestone work, the activity sets that are embedded within the strategies are addressing one or more of these elements within this framework. We took it directly from Ken Wagner, who was the former commissioner of education for Rhode Island. And some of the gaps that he presented that we were able to captivate and contextualize within this conceptual framework is the preparation gap. We know that at the early onset, the achievement gap is only a system of the root cause or symptom of the root cause, which the root cause is the preparation gap from birth to four. You'll see how we're addressing that in Middletown later in this presentation. But the hypothesis or the theory is that if we're able to close the preparation gap at an early segment, early onset, then we can be able to eliminate the achievement gap by grade one. When we think about the opportunity gap and the quality gap, the opportunity gap is more in the context of ensuring that all, capital ALL, have opportunities to learn, have opportunities for high quality instruction, have opportunities for a personalized learning model where they are the co-authors and our leaders and our teachers are the engineers of this dynamic of creating or having this level of co-creation of learning. Yes, it's grounded on standards. Yes, it's grounded on best practices and research in the context of pedagogy, but we have to be able to facilitate that with opportunities for them. We have to close the quality gap. We can talk about these radical designs or these innovative practices and strategies, but if we're not closing the quality gap, teachers, leaders need professional learning, need strategic and differentiated professional learning. Just like when we talk about pedagogy for differentiated learners and strategies, we have to have a level of differentiated professional learning opportunities, andragogy, for our teachers and leaders. But more importantly, if we're going to close those elements of the preparation opportunity and quality gap, that leads to the achievement gap. And I want to add another element of the excellence gap. Those are our students that are our high flyers, that sometimes our structures and our systems that are systemic in nature hold those high flyers back, the excellence gap. We have to ensure that every single practitioner, every single leader, every single person within this education ecosystem, every single stakeholder group have the opportunity to say that all students can learn, the belief gap. That's the art piece. So when you think about the process, the strategies, the theory of action, the value proposition, the new processes of an organization, the content is going to be supported by addressing one of these elements, specifically around the belief gap. In theory, if you don't close the belief gap, you're certainly not going to close the preparation, opportunity, achievement, excellence, or quality gap within your district. That's where mindset, mental model has to be the focus around equity. Now, we know that traditionally, and to start to challenge the system, right? We want to be able to, what we say in Middletown is challenge the status quo and change the status quo. Organizations historically, and specifically in education, is rooted in this inherited focused model, right? I like to call it batched industrialization, where the strategy, the structures and the systems are from outward in, meaning that the system itself in totality is the theory is supposed to change the individuals or stakeholders in your organization. That's where you get opposition and resistance. However, if you really want to change the system for innovation equity, it has to be an inward outward approach. Meaning, when we go back to the systemic equity framework, closing the belief gap, you have to change mental models, make sense of these new strategies in order to change the structures and the systems outward. That is a radical difference, or it is the antithesis of an outward inward approach to more now when we change the mental models and the collective mindset, systems capacity, then the structures and the systems would automatically change. Where now, in theory, the preparation quality excellence achievement gap, preparation gap will close. When you think about it, the outward inward approach is more tactical. That's traditional, right? It's a tactical systems design. We see that we see that in education across the country all the time. When you just add initiative after initiative after initiative after initiative after initiative, right? Without changing the structures to be able to support that, that is your tactical system design. But an inward outward approach is more adaptive in nature, where the flexibility of your systems and your structures now is adapting to who? Your most important customers, your students, your teachers, your families, your leaders, right? Because now you want to be able to ensure that there's a level of flexibility, adaptive nature, adaptation within your systems design. You're not just systemically saying, hey, oh, this is not working. The flexibility allows a level of experimentation within that. Innovation, we have so many definitions of innovation, right? Innovation can be defined in so many ways. I think now it's starting to become a buzzword. But specifically from MIT, this definition of innovation is taking an idea, the process of taking an idea from inception to impact. That's it. The process of taking an idea from inception to impact, meaning exploitation, ambidextrous environments are wanted because you want to create opportunities for a different business model or a different service model to ensure that there's impact within all of your constituency. That's it. Taking a process of an idea from inception to impact, matching the strategy to a solution. Now, I want you to take a look at this video, because when you see people in education, when you see leaders in education, and when they talk about innovation, this is actually the process that they take for innovation.
Phil? Phil,
Innovation Man.
what's going on?
Innovation Workshop.
And your job is?
Kick off the innovation agenda. Fire up the troops for innovation.
Hence the I.
I for ideation. I for incubation. I for invigoration.
I for implementation?
Oh, I knew I forgot something.
We see that too much in education, right? I want to come in and innovate everything that there is. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you going to innovate? What are you going to change? What data are you going to use to be able to capture that innovation, and how are you measuring that? One thing that we've done in Middletown is we started to adopt, or we have adopt this design thinking approach, right? This inward outward approach, where now when we look at design thinking in Middletown, the exploration process is a desirability for innovation, right? It's not your traditional bureaucracy approach or bureaucratical approach of we're going to change the structures from an outward inward approach, but we're using research. And what I mean by research, a research approach around an ethnographic approach to how we're going to innovate, meaning we get to the ground to understand what are the core problems within the system. It's not we just take it from an approach where we're going to make this change, but we have to understand what the problems are of our customers, right? When we think about John Coloco out of IDEO and Tim Brown and Stephen Eppinger from MIT, you have to be able to understand how you can provide better services to exploit the system from this ethnographic approach. Ethnography, right? Understanding what are the core issues that our most important customers are dealing with. Then the creation, right? And I want to use my R&D lens with this concept development process of taking the research and looking at how we can create architecture and systems and subsystem for a level of feasibility. All right. People are like, how is that aligned with education? Meaning that, I'll just give you one example, and it's going to be later in the presentation, age-graded classrooms. how we can dismantle that structure to create true personalized learning environments where now students are co-authors of their learning, and we're moving students along in a growth model in lieu of a proficiency model. Those are the elements that we have to constantly be able to take a look at from a feasibility lens to be able to develop those concepts and implement those radical ideas in education. And then the new business model, right? We have to move away from the analog business model or analog education model to now this operating model that is grounded on data analytics, technology, and next practices. Best practices is research-based. Next practices is research-based and grounded, but have the level of ambidexterity so that now we can explore strategically. So these whole design thinking principles, right? I took my team during the summer. It was a 12-week course at MIT. They did not want to do it. They did not want to do it. But I said, listen, if we're going to have this fundamental approach of being strategic disruptors, we have to have the same lexicon when we're designing this great organization. So when we got together in Middletown and when we started applying these design thinking approaches, we have to measure the level or the systematic level of design. What does that look like in context? First, Horizon One. This is directly from Clay Christensen's work out of the Harvard Business School, is the efficiency logic model. In the context of Michael Tushman's work and his book, Lead and Change, Lead and Disrupt, I apologize, out of Harvard Business School as well. This is what I call incremental innovation streams, Horizon One. You're only making tactical changes within the existing model. You see that in education, right? Instead of desk, now you see the round tables. Instead of utilizing or implementing certain software, now you have, a Chromebook in front of students. This was in the before COVID stage. These are the efficiency, logic, and innovation. Product innovation change is more of what Michael calls the architectural innovation streams. The brick and mortar is the same, but the components, but the linkage, what's inside the brick and mortar is different. That's where now you can start thinking about creating hubs, creating flexible classrooms and schedules within the schools or within your district. And growth disruptive innovation is in the context of traditionally blowing up the system, right? Is when your components and your linkage are different. When you think about dual enrollment, when you think about these radical ideas of now students having a half a day on their virtual learning devices where they're actually accessing playlists or asynchronous videos, that does have an effect size of 0.6 in accordance to Hattie. This as much as differentiate instruction, direct instruction, but direct instruction is overutilized in our classrooms. But when we think about creating those different environments, that's where growth disruptive innovation or punctuated change within a system. So you have to be able to measure how your ability of innovation and what type of innovation you want to implement. Your tolerance, right? This calls for a new leadership and what I like to call challenge-driven leadership for innovation and design. Tolerated idiosyncrasies, rapid prototyping, innovation capital, where now you're looking at the leverage and the impact of your innovation work. You want to have diversity in the context of expertise within your team, where it's not just dynamic, linear expertise, but now you have that dynamic adaptation where there's a variety of different experts that make up that conglomerate of that interdisciplinary group to make changes around the problem at hand. And being analytically hopeless, I like to say you got to use data for everything so you can seek for problems and to be problem centric. Now, strategies of innovation, this is more on the lines of Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 design, schools as hub, product and growth, disruptive innovation, teachers as engineers. We used to call them practitioners. Now we have to move beyond practitioners where they're engineering the learning. Students as co-authors, understanding what they have to learn and working in that co-facilitation so that now they're the owners, not just empowered. I'm not empowering you, but they are powered to learn. The shift to innovation calls for now you have this two-folded approach with the instructional core and what I like to call the digital core. The digital core. We know that teacher-student content is very important, but it has to work in a reciprocal manner with technology data analytics and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence are not going to replace our engineers, our learning engineers, our practitioners. Artificial intelligence is only going to enhance the differentiation because they can get to the proximate zone of get to the proximity of the zone of proximal development of our students. Machine learning is our friend. That's where now we have to be able to incorporate that and higher levels of analytics, not just kind of our unsupervised or our standardized business intelligence aspect of it, but we have to get to more to a deeper sophistication of modeling, incorporating data science to be able to test the failure modes, the traditional failure modes of education. So when we talk about innovation, we got to stop talking and start testing and doing.
I am Innovation Man. I am here to get you all fired up about innovation. Are you fired up? Fired up. Are you fired up? I'm fired up. I said, are you fired up? Yes. Why are you fired up? I don't have any idea.
I laugh at when I see that every single time because we bring these ideas, but people don't know why we're doing them. That's why the inward outward approach is foundational with this. And then the artistic work of the systems change is not the scientific aspect or the scientic rounded practices that I highlighted today. It's more about the equity work, right? And we need to have strategies to close the achievement, access, and opportunity gaps. And we know that equity is a part of now the education vernacular, right? The academic registrar of our practitioners, leaders, students. But I'm afraid that equity is going to become the next rigor, right? We remember what rigor became? Rigor became a buzzword, right? And we don't want equity to become a buzzword because now, more importantly, or more than ever, we have to ensure that we're providing equitable opportunities for our students. It's a simple definition, just like with innovation, is defining of what individuals need and how we could give them more and who are those individuals that need it. Now, what we see traditionally in education is what I like to call horizontal equality, not equity, right? And equity is not equality. Sometimes, not here in Middletown, we've really got a great definition of that, as well as the state of Connecticut, but we know that equality can't be equity. Why? Because equality is the same rights, but equity is more individualized. Equity is adaptable and differentiated by resources. Equality is same opportunity and same resources. We see when we look at how budget cycles are developed, right? That's more of the equality. How the academic day is structured, 6 hours and 45 minutes. That's equality. 180-day academic calendar, that is equality. That has historically held students back because the foundational structures and systems of education, the architecture of education that we continue to implement with a level of fidelity, right? Because we haven't changed it or thought about it differently. That is operationalizing itself on the equality strategy, right? 180-day calendar, monolithic instruction, time mandates in the academic day. These are all examples of what we see: letter grading, proficiency model, standardized assessments, right? This epitomizes, right? This leverages the industrial model of education that has only changed incrementally, efficient logic model or efficient logic implement innovation. When we talk about disruptive innovation and when we talk about disruptive equity, artificial intelligence, blended learning, personalized learning in academic hubs, eliminating standardized grading. Sometimes when I say this across the state and across the country, people think I'm absolutely crazy, but that is a pillar that creates inequities and academic disparities in our system. Occupational clusters and pathways where now students have agency of choice in the direction that they want to go. Individualization, as we talked about, from equity, shifting age graded classrooms. why, I always ask this question, why does a 6-year-old student is considered a first grader? Is there a policy around that? Why does a 14-year-old student have to be a ninth grader? I don't see the correlation, but historically, that's the way we used to do it. That's the way we still do it. Shifting away from age graded classrooms to more of a personalized competency based model, looking at students as individuals and are co authors of their learners. Culture, being culturally responsive and culturally competent, as well as prototyping and experimentation, prototyping new specific work designs in education, prototyping and experimenting with new activity sets, and then having a growth model for all of our students. Equity is having these discussions about bias, about privilege and fragility, because if we want to move to a disruptive equity model, we have to keep all students in mind. We have to have these tough conversations. We have to ensure that students' decisions are always grounded in equity, asking about specific segments within our organizations and challenging the mindsets. It's okay, leaders, to have individuals feel comfortably uncomfortable, because now equity leadership, we know, is messy, albeit impactful. It will elevate and accelerate what we saw at the outset from the Stanford study and the nation's report card. So just like Clay Christensen from Harvard, eloquently stated, decide what you stand for. Why do you do this? And then you stand for it all the time. My simple statement is just, hey, I love the kids more than adults, right? I remember I said that the first week when I came to Middletown. People that are here from Middletown will know this. I offended some people. I got some emails back saying, how can you state that you love the kids more than the adults? Because I do. This is why we do it. I love the adults, but I love the kids a little bit more. That's what I stand for. And I stand for that all the time. That's why when we make decisions, everybody from Middletown knows I said, is this best for kids? And if you're hesitant in it, then it's not best for kids. That's why we have to be disruptive equity warriors from a scientific lens and also from the artistic lens about that. And some of the things that we do here in Middletown, just to really fast before we conclude, is that for the preparation gap, right? We have solicited a partnership with Eileen Rosenthal and Footsteps to Brilliance, right? And incorporating this digital software to prepare students to couple with some of the traditional academic as well as the structures that we have in place, because we are disrupting early childhood education and trying to universalize it to close the preparation gap. This is a strategy and practice. Now we have an element where now our students are participating in the aerospace manufacturing program that we have, where we're encouraging more women of color, more women in general to go into aerospace and manufacturing, because we want to disrupt that model that it's not all about the guys, it's about our women as well. So we are now disrupting with an equity lens and ensuring that we're providing opportunities and access for our students. So, and also this is just real quick. When we talk about designing hubs, we're opening a new middle school in Middletown. And we wanted to be able to create a hub that has different levers, that has that level of connectivity within our pathways. And the innovation center that we're creating has a variety of different rooms that where now students can engage in, whether it be from the engineering, from the computer science aspect of it, from the curriculum, from the aerospace and manufacturing focus of it. And more importantly, now students are going to engage in programming. Our teachers right now at the secondary level is preparing themselves with Python, where now students are going to be able to learn those specific coding skills to be able to apply it in our new innovation lab. And downward scale is how we're redesigning our maker spaces to be able to engage in specific activities that are aligned with that. That again shows our vertical articulation of product and growth disruptive innovation. So as we end, and I'm 5:14, I got 1 minute with y'all. Going back to Clay Christensen, who I just admire his work, and Michael Tushman, and individuals from Harvard University and Kareem Khani. These are individuals that are just disruptors by context, right? And when we think about what Clay said, and God rest his soul, He passed away, but his work always resonates with, I like to call the incubators of innovators. And when we're breaking an old business model, there's always going to require leaders to follow their instinct. There will always be persuasive reasons not to take a risk. We always have to remember we have to take that risk, assessing the novelty of the risk with an equity lens. So remember what you stand for. And as you remember what you stand for, continue to change the world. That's what it's all about. Our why is our kids. So if you would like to stay in touch with me, here's my information. And I hope you have a great ALAS and NATSB experience. Thank you for joining me for this presentation.
Michael,